I grew up in the South. Tons and tons of beautiful places to see that haven't been taken over by concrete yet. It's nice. But along with that, it's pretty boring. Being a teenager and wanting to go out and have fun led to mostly improvising with your buddies and hoping something good will come out of the night. There wasn't really a local spot to go to hang out, like a club or a cool bar, and the places that were close to this were just boring because you did see them so many times. I'm sure if you've ever lived in a rural area, then you understand that feeling completely. Something that I found a ton of enjoyment in, though, as a teen, was just cruising around super late at night listening to music. I would fill up my gas tank, grab something to drink, and I would just take off driving until the sun came up. It was a way for me to just kind of clear my mind and relax. Those country back roads were always fun to drive down at 2 a.m. and was also just the right amount of spooky. But, well, one night, I absolutely got more than what I was bargaining for. I can't remember what month it was exactly, but I know for a fact that it was in the summertime because I was out of school, and I also remember it being a comfortable chilly night. So if I was to guess, it must have been around July or August, I'd say. I was cruising around like I always did and was completely worry-free. I had music blaring and I was in my zone, and I decided to head down to a park just out of boredom. This particular park is at the very end of a long stretch of desolate country road, but it's a really pretty drive because of that. When I say a desolate country road too, I don't mean that it's some dirt road that goes through the woods or something crazy like that. It is a normal paved road, but there's really nothing on it after a certain point. The entire road takes about 20 minutes, I think, to drive down to get to the park, and after about 10 minutes into the drive, the houses start to get spread out further and further to become no houses at all and just road leading into the park. I think a lot of the reason I like this drive at night is because of just how creepy it was, and I looked at it as some sort of adventure or whatever. But the park isn't open for camping or anything. It's mostly just a lot of land with walking trails and biking trails set up through miles of woods. So obviously, at around 3 a.m. in the morning, it's pretty dead. I made it there and just did a slow, normal little loop around drive of the park. The night before, it had actually stormed very badly. So badly, I remember my parents and I had taken shelter because of the threat of a tornado touchdown. There ended up being no tornado, but the storms were pretty damn rough. And because of this, I came upon a fallen tree in the road that looped around to the exit of the park that must have happened because of the storm. It wasn't some massive tree or anything, but I know for a fact that there was no way that I could have gotten over it in my car, obviously. It was pitch black everywhere besides the front of my car too because of my headlights, and because of that, I immediately ruled out backing up the entire way that I just drove when I entered the park. I knew that it was super dangerous, and there was just no way that I was going to do that. At this point on the road, there was a flat land on each side of me. I figured that it would make the most sense to just back up into the grass beside me just a little and then drive back the way I came. It was a one-way loop anyway around the park, but I wasn't really worried about going out of the wrong way since it was so late. It was a one-way loop around the park, but I wasn't really worried about going out the wrong way or anything like that. So I started to back up off the road so I could get my car to turn around. All was good until I went to pull back up on the road, and I totally didn't take into account just how wet the grass was and the amount of mud. My car went absolutely nowhere. My back tires were completely stuck and were spinning in place as I was trying to floor the gas pedal. I started to become pretty scared at this point. Not the most ideal situation to be in, right? I immediately took my cell phone out of my pocket and I saw that I had service. That was a super huge feeling of relief for me, and I called my parents and told them what happened and where I was. They were pretty pissed at me, but said that they'll pay for a tow truck to come out to get me. My parents both drove small 4-door sedans, and they would have been zero help in this situation. I was about 45 minutes away from my house at this point, and the rest of most human civilization too. So I realized that I was going to be stuck out there for at least an hour before someone was able to get to me. It was a freaky feeling, but I tried getting it out of my head and just continued to listen to music and be on my phone in the car while I waited. I mean, there wasn't much more I could do. After I kind of calmed down from the initial anger I had, I started to check out my surroundings. and I didn't even notice at first because of everything going on. But in front of my car's placement was a field that was full of the most amount of deer that I think I'd ever seen at once. There legitimately must have been at least 40 deer just in this field, walking around and eating the grass. The field wasn't directly in front of my car, but if I was to get out and throw a rock in that direction, I would have easily been able to hit at least one of them. So, if I was to guess, they must have been about 30 yards out. This obviously didn't really help with the creepy level going on. Looking out in front of your car and seeing 80 eyes reflect staring back at you is a bit of an alarming feeling overall, but I must admit that I was relieved that it was just a field of deer and not something else. I watched them for a little bit, but I was quickly over it, and I started to just browse through my social media apps while waiting. They seemed to have been over it quicker than I was, because they all went back to walking around and eating once they figured out that I wasn't going to attack them or anything. After browsing my phone for about 15 minutes, I finally get a call back from my parents letting me know that a tow truck guy is on the way and about an hour and a half from my location. Still to this day, I remember hearing that and having the thought, you've got to be kidding me. Don't get me wrong, I understood that me and only me was the reason I was in this situation in the first place, so I couldn't really be mad at anyone else. But that was very obviously not what I wanted to hear. I decided that the smartest thing for me to do then was just to make sure my doors were all locked, lay back in my seat, and just take a nap to pass the time quickly. And so that's what I did. So I wake up about 45 minutes later, I'd say, to the feeling of just being watched. I'm not sure if anyone has ever experienced that feeling before, because I don't know how common it is, but there was a sixth sense alarm going off in my head, just telling me that I need to wake up. Waking up to that feeling in that situation I was in, and the surroundings that I was in too, is probably the worst case scenario that I've ever been in. I sit up and immediately check my surroundings, and I don't see anything. I look through my car very quickly for any sort of weapon, and I found a pocket knife. A pocket knife is all I had. I was scared, and that was definitely not comforting. And the strangest thing was that even though I saw and heard absolutely nothing, that feeling was just terrifying. I was shocked to see that the field of deer in front of me was still full of deer. I don't know anything about the animal, but I guess I always just assumed that they don't hang out in the same place for too long. I'm not sure why I thought that, but I was surprised to see them nonetheless. I called my parents back to see if they'd heard any kind of update from the tow truck dude. I decided not to mention the feeling that I was having because I didn't want to worry them more than they already probably were. And I also knew that it was literally nothing more than a feeling that I had, and had nothing to back up why I was feeling that way, other than just being spooked out in general. But there was no update from the tow truck guy, so we all assumed everything was still the same on his end. The call lasted just a few minutes because, at this point, I just felt like an absolute dick. They both have to wake up for work in a few hours, and now have to spend a random $100+, and on top of all of that, they're worried about me. I could tell that they were annoyed at the situation, but they were mostly worried. So I told them that I'd make sure to tell them when the guy arrives, and I was really sorry. We hung up, and I looked up from the phone, and immediately went from 0 to 100 in panic mode. The deer in front of me were all completely perked up, staring in the same direction, right of them. Let me remind you that there were around 40 deer in this field, and every single one of them had stopped dead in their tracks, standing completely still, looking at something. I put my high beams on and stared, waiting for absolutely anything to happen at all, but nothing. I tapped my horn real quick, and they didn't even budge or look my way. They were all just completely glued to what was by them. The way the tree line was, I couldn't see that far over the field. I know that they were looking into the woods by them, but where I was at, I was only able to see them. I could actually hear my heartbeat at this point, and I grabbed the stupid pocket knife, and I just waited for something to happen. I would say that it must have been about a minute after I honked that every single one of them, in unison, started to run the opposite way. They were running at full speed, and within 20 seconds, the field was completely empty. I was petrified in fear. I knew that staying in my car is what would be the safest thing to do as well, but it was the worst feeling in the world when you just have to sit there feeling like a sitting duck. My head was on a swivel. I was freaking out in every way possible. I assumed that it was a bear or something, but it could have been absolutely anything. I was convinced at that point that it was the devil himself, and I didn't know what to do. I knew that the tow truck was close by, but I had no idea where he was. I began to shake because of nerves and just looked around to make sure nothing was by me, and focusing on the field in front of me. I did this for what felt like an actual eternity, sitting in complete silence and darkness in the middle of nowhere, waiting for something to jump out and attack me. It was honestly 15 of the longest minutes of my life that have ever gone by, and I start to see lights break through the tree on the line of the road. As it gets closer, I see that it must be the tow truck guy. And quite honestly, the lights on his truck felt like Jesus' second coming from heaven to rescue me. He gets up to me, and I jump out of my car and immediately ask him if he has a gun on him. I told him very quickly what just happened to me and that something is definitely out there nearby. He let me know that he had a shotgun in the truck and assured me that it was most likely a bear or just a bobcat. He then gave me the whole, they're more scared of you than you are of them shtick, and the tree was small enough for him to just sort of bulldoze it out of the way with his truck, and then he attached my car to his and he pulled me out of the spot that I was stuck in. He was very nonchalant about what I had just experienced, but I was pretty badly shaken up by it. And the whole time that he was doing his thing, I still had my eyes glued out in that field, just waiting for something. But he was completely done with everything in about 15 minutes, and he told me to follow his truck out there onto the main road again. I got in my car and was ready more than anything to just get the hell out of this park. We started to drive away from the spot that I was in, and I still had my head on a swivel, completely shook up. And as we were driving away, I looked in my rearview mirror. We were down the park road just a tiny bit, but I could still just see the spot that I was stuck in partially lit up from the vehicle's lights and the moon as well. And I watched in my rearview mirror as a man came out from the tree line behind where my car was, walked into the middle of the road and just stood there and watched us drive away. My heart stopped beating at that point, legitimately. I lost my breath and my eyes started to get full of tears because of how absolutely scared I was in that moment. I couldn't see any sort of details like what he looked like or even necessarily what he was wearing. To be honest, I don't really care either. The feeling that I felt driving away from that spot, knowing that he was right there the whole time just watching me as I was freaking out and just looking around, watching me as I was completely alone for the longest time, and who knows, maybe even coming right up to my window and watching me sleep. That's a feeling that is something that I just can't put into words. All these years later too, and it still messes with me quite a bit. The entire time we were driving off, as long as I could see him, he just didn't move as well. He just stood there, watching us in the road. A million things went through my head. I was scared that there may have been multiple people up the road just waiting for us. I was trying to figure out if I should start beeping on my horn like crazy to get the tow truck guy to stop or not. I decided that all I wanted to do was get out of there, though, in the end, more than anything. And the second that we finally got out of that park and was able to be on a 2-lane road again, I flew past the tow truck driver, and I did nothing below 70 miles the entire way home. I flew through stop signs and stoplights, and I just absolutely did not care. At this point, the only thing on my mind was making it home again. I eventually did get home, and I ran inside, very quickly acknowledging my parents, and I said sorry and thank you, and I just went to my room. I didn't get a single second of sleep the rest of the night, and I was searching for any sort of records of things happening in that area, escaped convicts, similar stories, etc., and I came to the conclusion that the man must have been some sort of squatter or homeless man. I read many things online about how it's common for homeless people in rural areas to build shelters in the woods, which does make a lot of sense as to why they would do that. But obviously, the unknown is the scariest part of it all. I mean, what if he wasn't homeless? What if he was going to hurt me? What if, right? There are just so many possibilities of what could have happened that night. But the outcome that did happen is what I'm definitely most grateful for. I never did tell my parents this story until many years after it happened, and I was already an adult and moved out. It really freaked them out too when I told them, and I never went back to that park, ever. And even though I no longer live by there, I still have no desire at all to ever go back there. I honestly don't even think that I could even be in broad daylight with a ton of people around and still go there. I also made the decision to stop doing those late night cruises at this point, and I did a few after that time with some other people, but even then, I felt very uncomfortable and still on edge. To contextualize, I'm from France, and this story takes place when I was about 8 years old, and slept in my grandparents' house that week because my school was right next to it. Now, they lived in a building on the very top floor, whose only way to open the main door was to know the code number, to have a badge, or to call a resident who can open from the inside. So it happened when I was at their home. I was in a bedroom upstairs, and my grandmother was sleeping downstairs. It was late at night, like 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, when everything started. My grandfather worked at night, and at that time they only had one key for the door, so my grandmother left the door open most of the time. It was always like that at around 6 a.m. on the way home from work, so that instead of waking up my grandmother, my grandfather could just open it. As I said, that was the first door of the building. It's not directly open on the outside, so it is a bit protected, I suppose. But one night, I hear my grandmother screaming in fear, and then suddenly, just nothing. I was still half asleep and at the same time scared. I mean, waking up like this was weird, but I wasn't too worried because I thought that I would just go and see her and make sure she's okay. I thought that maybe she'd fallen over or something. A few minutes later, I didn't know what the actual time was at this point. I didn't have a phone or alarm clock. She calls me to go down, and then she told me, I'm sure that someone was just watching me sleep, and she thinks that she actually fainted instantly. I thought that maybe it was in her dream or something, and she fell asleep fast, but we still waited for the return of my grandfather, without sleeping just in case. When my grandfather came back, she told him that there was someone sitting right next to her, very close on the floor, with barely the upper body and the head visible from the bed, who was just sitting there, watching her sleep, and that he was wearing a hooded K-way. My grandfather replied, wait, he just said goodnight to me in the stairwell. And he quickly raced back down there to try and find the guy, but when he did, the guy wasn't there. It was a little after this, too, that the neighbour said that she was actually called on the intercom by a man that she didn't know, that said to her, I'm my grandfather's name's colleague, can you open the door? I just brought him back here with my car. But my grandfather has never seen this guy before, has his own car, and his first name is not written anywhere in the building, only the last name, and why that man knew that my grandfather was working that night too, we will probably never know. So me and my 2 closest friends always tried to get creative with the games that we would play. One night, when we were in 9th grade, we were having a sleepover at T's house. T had a lot of toy weapons still in the garage that he never threw out, so in this game of hide-and-seek, the Seeker used the lightsabers and Nerf guns to tag the hiding players. We played outside at night in December, which made it spooky and hard to find each other, so once a player was found, they would become a Seeker too. After a few rounds, it was my turn to be the Seeker. I first found Jay, so we quietly started searching for T. In T's neighbourhood, all of the houses are really tight and dark, so we'd usually hide in between people's houses. As me and Jay were walking down the street, I thought that I heard shuffling in the rocks behind an AC unit. And of course, we thought that it was T, so we started telling him, okay, come on out. But nobody answered. Until seconds after, a white and hairless head with dark eyes popped up and looked at us and just ducked back down. It was obviously not T, and like the kids that we were, we ran off yelling T's name to come back to the house. He ended up being on the other end of the neighbourhood, and when we went back to investigate, we didn't find anything. Jay and I still remember, and T makes fun of us because he thought that we were joking, but we swore that we saw the exact same thing. Obviously, I have no clue what it could have been, but it definitely looked like a person. I'm an adult now, but when I think about it, it still gives me the chills. G'day mates, it's Busta here. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and if you would like to help me out, then please go ahead and watch another video by clicking on a card on the screen. As always guys, thanks for all the love and support, and I'll see you mates in the next one.